So, as to this point, we have seen Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist, him going through many different struggles, healing the sick. We had a lot of different varieties of healing the sick, and teaching those that could learn and those that were stubborn and hard of heart that would not be able to process the information he was trying to give them. But he continued on and continued trying to reach as many people as he could. He didn't restrict himself by class or position. We saw him dealing with the tax collectors, some of the lowest in society, and we saw him healing a man with leprosy, one that was ostracized from society due to his illness. So he was encompassing in his love and care of the people, but he struggled when it came to those that rejected him and looked for every reason they could to silence him, for they would not hearken to what he was teaching. They only looked to kill him. So let us look at another episode. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 3:1. Again Jesus went into a synagogue, and a man was there who had one withered hand, as the result of accident or disease. 3:2. And the Pharisees kept watching Jesus closely to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might get a charge to bring against him formally. So this reads a lot like a plot or a setup, an ambush, a method of entrapment. Typically the Jewish people, they go to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. It is a day of rest and worship of the Lord. And it seems as if they found this man with a withered hand, and they made sure that he was going to be there that day, thinking that if Jesus came, they could catch him in the act of breaking the Sabbath day, which would be breaking one of their laws, performing a work on the holy day. But we'll see how he responds to this. The Gospel according to Mark. 3:3. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, Get up and stand here in the midst. Jesus knows what's going on here. He knows this plot. He knows men's hearts. He knows what they want to do. He doesn't react by healing this man subtly or in a corner. No, he brings him forth, brings him into the center of the grouping so that all can see, so that there can be no doubt that this is what happened. As many witnesses as possible. The Gospel according to Mark. 3:4. And he said to them, Is it lawful and right on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to take it? But they kept silence. So here Jesus has caught them up in a logic. If they are to say it is lawful to do good, he would simply say, well, then what's the problem? And they can't say it's lawful to do evil, because it's never lawful to do evil. So what can they really say to this? So they keep quiet. He silenced them. They have no rebuttal to this, because anything they say, he wins. The Gospel according to Mark. 3:5. And he glanced around at them with vexation and anger, grieved at the hardening of their hearts, and said to the man, Hold out your hand. He held it out, and his hand was completely restored. So even though it was a setup, even though it was a trap, and they were conspiring against him, he tried to negotiate, but they didn't want to negotiate. They didn't want to talk this through. He healed the man anyway. He didn't hold this against them, and he regenerated the man's hand. I imagine there was quite a torrent of emotion in that man as his hand was being regenerated. Perhaps he was in league with these people, and he came with them with the intent of doing this. Maybe they were going to pay him or some sort of back of the envelope type of deal. I'm sure it was very conflicting, but it is what it is. The Gospel according to Mark. 3:6. Then the Pharisees went out and immediately held a consultation with the Herodians against him, how they might devise some means to put him to death. So these men, they were there. They saw the miracle that Jesus did, and they would have heard the words of his teaching, but they rejected all of it. In their own self-righteousness, they thought they would do God's work by killing this man. They couldn't argue with him. They didn't have the ability to do that. They remained silent. But they decided in their hearts that he needed to die. And here we have kind of the start or the beginning of that plot to eliminate him, to silence him, to prevent him from healing, teaching. And we'll see more of that later on. The Gospel according to Mark 3:7. And Jesus retired with his disciples to the lake, and a great throng from Galilee followed him, also from Judea. 3:8. And from Jerusalem to Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan, and from about Tyre and Sidon, a vast multitude, hearing all the many things that he was doing, came to him. 3:9. And he told his disciples to have a little boat in constant readiness for him because of the crowd, lest they press hard upon him and crush him. So as Jesus continues to heal and teach in all these different places, his reputation continues to grow, and there's a whole crowd following after him. And he's got an escape boat so that he can get away in case the crowd goes crazy and they trample him to death. And if they were to trample him to death, they'd probably trample other people to death. It could just get really messy. The Gospel according to Mark 3:10. For he had healed so many that all who had distressing bodily diseases kept falling upon him and pressing upon him in order that they might touch him. 3:11. And the spirits, the unclean ones, as often as they might see him, fell down before him and kept screaming out, "You are the Son of God." So he healed many people of unclean spirits or demon possession. Now, some people like to write that off as simply being a form of mental illness or psychiatric help. And I mean, there's no reason to believe that he didn't heal people that were suffering from depression or schizophrenia or whatever it may have been by those classifications we use today. But demon possession was a real thing. It's just often the way that we perceive it limits us to comprehending exactly what that probably means. It's very difficult to understand things in dimensions that we cannot perceive or interact with. We know that refined uranium or cesium, the radioactive effect of them, that they are very dangerous for us to be exposed to. We can't see them, we can't smell them, we can't taste them, but we can make equipment to detect the radiation, and then through our understanding we're able to figure out ways of staying safe. But that's not to say that there are other things out there that we can't really perceive, and we don't really have the tools or equipment to interact with them to necessarily know what all these mechanics are behind the scenes. The question that would follow this would be, why was there so much then and so much less now? I mean, to a certain extent, Christianity has been fighting against demon possession for millennia. And perhaps areas where there's a lot of Christianity, there's just a lot less demon possession. But in areas in other countries where there's a lot less Christianity, it's far more common. And oftentimes we see cultures that have a desire to be demon possessed, and they do all these rituals and different things to try to acquire these spirits. such as like voodooism in areas such as Haiti. And that is not the only culture or the only grouping or the only classification or type or category of groups of people that try to be possessed by spirits. Yoga, if you look into its fundamentals, it kind of has a lot of those elements as well. But it's kind of been whitewashed to remove its historical context and what it really was. From another argument or perspective, we could say, look at some of the evil that these people do. What possesses someone to do such and such a thing? Maybe go to a place of education armed with weaponry or vehicles driving into pedestrians or other acts of heinous violence and evil. Are they in their right mind? Is this something they wanted to do? Or was there some sort of spirit influencing them to cause them to perform some of these heinous acts? Maybe some, maybe a little, probably not none. So this stuff kind of goes on, but we just kind of write it off as being something else. Someone just wasn't in their right mind. It's like, well, they weren't in their right mind because they were influenced by whatever. Anyway, the Gospel according to Mark 3:12. And he charged them strictly and severely, under penalty again and again, that they should not make him known. So these evil spirits, or these spirits of possession, due to their nature, they were able to identify Jesus for who he was. And Jesus didn't want them telling everyone that he was the Son of God. He didn't want people to have faith in him or believe in him based on the testimony of demons. That was not his desire. He wanted it to be from his goodness and his godliness and his works, his healing, and all these wonderful things that he did. He wanted to be known for that and not by the evil that is in the world. So that's why when he saw them, he silenced them and cast these demons out. The Gospel according to Mark 3:13. And he went up on the hillside and called to him for himself those whom he wanted and chose, and they came to him. 3:14. And he appointed 12 to continue to be with him, and that he might send them out to preach as apostles or special messengers. So things are getting serious. They're picking up, and there is much work to be done. And he has appointed 12 to be these apostles. And he is going to delegate to them special abilities and privileges. And they are going to assist with the work that needs to be done. We have seen a few of these men before. We saw some of them being recruited, but now we are going to see the names of all those who are the 12 apostles. The Gospel according to Mark 3:15. And to have authority and power to heal the sick and to drive out demons. They were Simon, and he surnamed him Peter. 3:17. James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, and he surnamed them Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder. So English is a very informal language, and it does not have that much respect for names, despite the impact that they may or may not have on an individual. Oftentimes a name can denote the lineage of someone, for better or worse, often restricting them from certain jobs or positions, or at least making them more difficult to obtain. There is some value in names, but we as a culture do not put emphasis on it, at least overtly. So we're probably not able to truly understand some of the significance here when it comes to the renaming and the cultural impact and the significance of that which occurs. But we have Simon here being called Peter, and that's what Simon Peter is. It's Simon, and then he was surnamed Peter, so it's the same person. Of course, James and John being surnamed Boanerges, the sons of thunder, sounds a lot more exciting. The Gospel according to Mark 3:18, and Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew, Nathanael and Matthew and Thomas and James son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Judas not Iscariot, and Simon the Canaanite, also called Zelotes. So Bartholomew is also known as Nathanael, and Thaddeus, his other name being Judas, and he is a different Judas than Judas Iscariot. And the translators, they put this in brackets to kind of give extra emphasis on what exactly is going on here, but that's just kind of how it was. The Gospel according to Mark 3:19, and Judas Iscariot, who would betray him. So now we have the mention of the final one, Judas Iscariot, the one who would betray him. We're going to see more of him later on. It's pretty interesting how Jesus made him one of his disciples, despite knowing that he was going to betray him. For there are several prophecies linked to the betrayal. We have the act of betrayal, the amount of money for the betrayal, and some other prophecies as well. So it was necessary that this man was made one of his disciples. The Gospel according to Mark 3:20. Then he went to a house, probably Peter's, but a throng came together again, so that Jesus and his disciples could not even take food. 3:21. And when those who belonged to him, his kinsmen, heard it, they went out to take him by force, for they kept saying, "He is out of his mind, beside himself, deranged." So Jesus is so busy he's not even able to eat a meal. And we have his family coming by, his biological family coming by to see what's going on. The Gospel according to Mark 3:22. And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He is possessed by Beelzebub, and by the help of the prince of demons he is casting out demons." So we have some of the scribes and the Pharisees here that have come from Jerusalem. So perhaps they were people of authority, some of the bigwigs. They heard what was going on, and they came down here to pass judgment. And they accused Jesus of being demon possessed by Beelzebub. Now Beelzebub is, of course, the Lord of the Flies. He was one of the pagan deities of that era and time. And they say that he is using demons to cast out demons, which that's quite the claim. Let's see what Jesus is going to respond to this charge. The Gospel according to Mark 3:23. And he summoned them to him and said to them in parables, illustrations or comparisons put beside truth to explain them. How can Satan drive out Satan? 3:24. And if a kingdom is divided and rebelling against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. This section here is very fascinating, and I think it's important to be exact when it comes to what the charge is that the scribes have against Jesus. It's not that he is possessed by a demon and the demons are all in on it, and it's like some sort of big ruse or some sort of big plan. No, it's using the power of a demon to drive out other demons, which has a very different context. And it is not a subversion, but an act of force. And Jesus' response here with the first parable is the kingdom divided and rebelling against itself. So the demons, they're not individualistic. They are united by a common cause. And as such, they don't rebel or fight against each other. That they are a collective and they have a greater ambition. Of course, the ambition of Satan to be like the Most High. So they're not rebelling against each other. They're not fighting amongst themselves. And if they are perceived to be doing that, it is a ruse or an act of subversion, theatrics, similar to what we see in politics with political theater, where we have these people acting as if things are one way, but behind closed doors, they're another. Although that leans into the idea of conspiracy, which may not necessarily be the right angle to go here, but just take that as an example. The Gospel according to Mark 3:25. And if a house is divided, split into factions, and rebelling against itself, that house will not be able to last. So the demons need to be very united to accomplish their goals. They work together. We have examples here of the macro with the kingdom, the big scale. In the grand scheme of things, they can't really be fighting against each other. Then we have what we see in this verse, the house. So the micro, the smaller scale, that even the lower numbers of demons, there's no rebellion there, or else their kingdom would not last. For what happens is you have fractures or splits in the micro, and then they spread and expand into the macro. So it would be something that would kind of crumble the whole kingdom from a smaller point of entry, so to say. So if the house is going to fall apart, so is the kingdom. And it shows just how united the demons are when it comes to opposing God. The Gospel according to Mark 3:26. And if Satan has raised an insurrection against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but is surely coming to an end. So now we have the kingdom, we have the household, and now we have the individual. And in all three cases, there can be no rebellion. The forces of evil work together for evil. They are probably more united and working together better than any other government or nation on earth. The Gospel according to Mark 3:27. But no one can go into a strong man's house and ransack his household goods, right and left, and seize them as plunder, unless he first binds the strong man. Then indeed he may thoroughly plunder his house. So in this parable, we're looking at the demon possession. And we have a bit of a metaphor here of it being like a house. So somebody has a house and they're doing their own thing. Life is good. Everything's fine. But then we have this strong man who comes by and kicks the guy out of the house and takes possession of the house. This is kind of like a squatter, that they go and dwell in someone else's property, and then they get very fortified and well situated, and it's very difficult to remove them. It's not unheard of people being invited in and then taking possession as well. So the only way to remove them is to go in there, tie the guy up, and then you can throw him out the door and throw out all of his junk as well. So the idea here being that if Satan has to go through all this effort to get situated in somebody to possess them, that they're not going to go and drive out somebody else that did the same thing. Because first of all, the demons are all united. They all work together for the common goal that they have following Satan. It's also kind of like a high value target, in that it's probably very difficult for them to do this, and it would be incredibly wasteful just to throw that away. And in the Gospel of Luke, we have that idea of them casting out the demon, but not fortifying the house to prevent it from happening again. So that demon, he gets cast out, gets all of his buddies, goes back in there and takes possession again, and the person's worse off than they were beforehand. So there's certainly a risk of that as well. And with the Holy Spirit, Jesus is able to drive demons out and prevent them from ever going back. The Gospel according to Mark 3:28. Truly and solemnly I say to you, all sins will be forgiven the sons of men and whatever abusive and blasphemous things they utter. 3:29. But whoever speaks abusively against or maliciously misrepresents the Holy Spirit can never get forgiveness, but is guilty of and is in the grasp of an everlasting trespass. So Jesus is still talking to those Pharisees, and he is warning them of the severity of what it is that they are doing, that they are driving people away from the Lord God, and they are misrepresenting him. And this is something that he cannot forgive. They are in a very different position because they are with Jesus, witnessing the miracles that he is performing, and they are attributing them to Satan. They are also refusing to listen to Jesus' teachings, and they are probably with the other group conspiring to get rid of him. So this unforgivable sin is something very specific and time sensitive, and is perhaps linked to being a first-hand witness to these events, and not something that is necessarily to be applied today, because we see many individuals who were against Christ and worked against him, but then accepted Christ and turned their lives around and preached the gospel or taught the Bible or whatever it was. But they are not under the same category as these people here, seeing firsthand Jesus healing people and attributing it to demons. The Gospel according to Mark. 3:30. For they pestered in saying, he has an unclean spirit. So this is slander. And this accusation here is baseless, and it is destructive. The Gospel according to Mark. 3:31. Then his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent word to him, calling for him. In verse 21, we saw Jesus' family members, his kinsmen. They were outside, and they wanted to take him out. They wanted to pull him out of there, thinking that maybe he is beside himself, that he's gone crazy. And perhaps they were under the influence of what these scribes were saying, that he was possessed or whatever it was. But now we are seeing their return. So after this little encounter that he had with the scribes, now we're going back to what we were looking at before this started, that his mother and brothers are calling for him. The Gospel according to Mark. 3:32. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, your mother and your brothers and your sisters are outside asking for you. 3:33. And he replied, who are my mother and my brothers? So the crowd around him is relaying this message to him, that his family members are looking for him. And he subverts their expectations. They probably think, well, he's going to go out and see them, or he's going to bring them in there, or whatever it's going to be. Instead, he subverts their expectations by questioning who is his mother and who are his brothers. And I'm sure the crowd here, they're wondering, what does this mean? Of course, you know who they are. Those are your, maybe he is actually crazy. He doesn't know who his family members are, but there's more to this than that. The Gospel according to Mark. 3:34. And looking around on those who sat in a circle about him, he said, see, here are my mother and my brothers. 3:35. For whoever does the things God wills is my brother and sister and mother. So rather than looking at family in the sense of biology and biological relations, he is looking at family in more of a spiritual sense, and how those that are around him, those following God's will, those are who are united by the Spirit, united by him. That is a much greater form of family. And he is calling those that are in the Spirit, those who believe in, trust in him, are brought together in a way greater than biology, and they are his true family. And that certainly is a pretty cool verse to end the chapter.